Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today's show is a special joint production of the University of the District of Columbia and Prince George's Community Television. I'm here in Largo, Maryland, where we'll be talking about university efforts to recruit and enroll undocumented students. Rosemary Martin is Assistant Director of Admissions for Purdue University. Rosemary manages Purdue's recruitment in the Washington, D.C. area and is fluent in English and Spanish. Olander Fleming is Assistant Director of Admissions for Emerging Populations at Longwood University. Olander offers Spanish panels and presentations for bilingual prospective students and their families. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you both here. So maybe if we can start with the definition of undocumented students. I know there's a lot of controversy about this. What is the definition of an undocumented student, and how is that definition different than an illegal student or someone who perhaps is documented but not in the right way?
I think a good precursor to this is definitely explaining that, we use the term undocumented because it's politically correct to use that term rather than illegal student or illegal alien. So just worldwide, it started to be used as undocumented. So that's why we use that term. Olander, do you want to explain the definition?
Yeah, so undocumented is a student that has no paperwork, is here without any legal status, and that is slightly different from a deferred action student. DACA student is what we call it for short, which is a student that is technically legally here, although they may have either entered the country illegally or entered the country legally, but extended their stay past their time when they were supposed to have left the country. So those students, by government definition, are legally here because we know they are here and they're just delaying their deportation. So you have the undocumented, you have DACA students, and then an illegal alien would be sort of the same lines of the undocumented, as Rosemary said, or undocumented and legal are the same student, or it's just more politically correct to use undocumented.
Well, but let's go through that term a little bit. So if my parents came here from El Salvador when I was 5, and I went through years of schooling, that's generally what most people are talking about when they're talking about undocumented students, or what percentage of students are we talking about who fit that category?
Yes, so a student who were to come here from El Salvador or any other country in the world, come here illegally with their parents, go through schooling. If they haven't applied for any sort of documentation here, sometimes students from El Salvador do qualify for refugee status, so maybe could be even a different country outside of that, say Mexico. That seems to be the country of choice lately when it comes to talking on the subject. But with it, undocumented student were to come with their parent, go through schooling, they would still have to apply for DACA status in order to legally be here if they were undocumented at the time when they go through school and say they were to graduate high school.
Well, what I find interesting about what both of you are doing is you represent two different universities, and this is a very gray area. And meanwhile, here you are on a TV show talking about this, so somebody at your university was supportive of you being here. This is kind of interesting that you're getting support from your universities to be here to talk about something that's fairly controversial.
It is. Yes, it is a greatly controversial topic, not just at the university level, but obviously at the governmental level, local level, and it's a hot topic, though. It's the reality of the nation. These students are here. Some of them are top achieving, top performing, top talented students that we want to see succeed. And in our profession in higher education, we aren't out to pick and choose who can and can't be successful at a university. We're there to teach them, inform them of what we can provide them, and see them go on and be successful in their own route. So yes, it is a touchy subject, but it's something that all universities across the nation are starting to recognize and address because they are seeing more activity from these students at a national level, at a local level. So it is something that they have to put an eye on. They have to keep the conversation going because it's an ever-evolving topic as well. Well,
let's talk about some of that a little bit if we can. The issue of cost. as you both know, I'm supportive, and I have been supportive of the DREAM Act, and I think it is important. As an educator, I've supported that. But as someone who's hosting this show, part of my job is to ask questions about different perspectives on public policy issues. And this seems to be something that costs universities and states a fair amount of money. And so what's the public policy rationale for supporting undocumented students getting in-state tuition versus students who come from, or just plain old international students?
Well, for that, the students that would be considered, at least in the state of Virginia, considered for in-state tuition are those under DACA status. So they have the documentation, whereas an undocumented student in the state of Virginia wouldn't be able to provide enough information to be considered for in-state tuition. And so as far as costs, and speaking specifically on a DREAM Act, of course the federal DREAM Act still has yet to be passed by Congress. It came about around 2001 and is still being debated as we speak today. But it is interesting, this state that we're in right now, Maryland, has their own version of a DREAM Act for students. And at the time, we can speak a little bit more on the specifics of it, but at the time of the DREAM Act, which was back in 2012 that they passed it, they predicted it would cost around $3.5 million for the state of Maryland up front by 2016. But the overall cost would be evened out by those students who would be able to attain an education, to receive a better quality education and be able to enter the workforce as a more qualified individual, thus being able to help support the economy.
And in fact, has that happened?
Well, there's some that have been able to go through. This year should be the first year of those students graduating and transitioning over to be able to see what those numbers are. They predicted that the $3.5 million would take place by 2016. So I'm assuming that's when they'll be able to look and see how it has affected the economy, pros and cons of it.
And the reality is only 2% of last year's graduating class was made up of undocumented students that we know about. I mean, only a small percentage of those are actually applying into four-year institutions, two-year institutions, and actually going through the entire process because of the cost or the burden of cost for them.
Well, let's assume I was a high school student applying to Purdue or Longwood. How would you know that I was undocumented or that I was a DACA student?
Well, really, it's different for every institution about how they process that application and exactly what the institution requires for the application. At Purdue specifically, they can provide us with their ID number regardless if they're undocumented, documented, or they can decide they don't want to. Really where it comes into effect is definitely the financial aid process because they won't be qualified for any financial aid. Fortunately, if they are Indiana residents and they want to apply for Indiana residency through our busser's office, they can do that with providing their DACA documentation. That being said, I don't have the exact number of how many have been approved through that process, but I know that they are able to still apply for in-state tuition through that process.
And I realize you're representing your universities here today, but what if there was a private university in Washington, D.C., call it American University or Georgetown or George Washington University? Is there anything that prevents those universities from giving students full scholarships who fit these categories?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's up to the institution, but fortunately, private institutions, they have private donations, they have private donors, they have alums that provide them with funding, so they can make their own policies. Their board of directors, board of rectors, whoever it might be that works with them on those institutional policies can choose to provide full funding for undocumented students if they choose to allot their funds in that manner.
And if I may add additional information on undocumented students, there are 2 states in the nation from the research I've been able to put together that do not allow undocumented students to attend their higher education public universities. The rest don't have any specific wording in any law that bans students, undocumented students, from attending, although Virginia, back in 2003, then Attorney General, made a ruling suggesting that public universities ask for documentation paperwork, or at least within the application, whether or not they are a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, etc., during the application process, although it is not, like I said, a state law requiring that a student fill that information out. But when it does come to the residency, they must be able to provide some sort of documentation to prove Virginia residency domicile.
So just to be clear, though, you're saying that there are different levels. There's an undocumented student who's not allowed to matriculate, and then there's an undocumented student who's allowed to matriculate but wouldn't count as an in-state resident. In particular states.
In particular states, yes. Yes. In other states where they are undocumented and don't have DACA status, these individuals are considered either international or out-of-state students. Even though they may reside in the state, that is what they would be considered when it comes to the tuition purposes, and that's what they would be charged if they decided to enroll and attend.
And politically, how do you navigate this at your universities? Because there's got to be somebody at your university campus, on each campus, who says, wow, that we're spending a lot of money here. Why shouldn't we be spending this money on other sorts of students?
Absolutely. Of course, we, as admissions professionals, I know our administration consults our lawyers. Of course, the board is definitely in on the conversation. So it's an ongoing conversation. It's something that we want to make sure we're abiding by all laws that are presented before us. But it's also something that we need to recognize and find a solution rather than just shutting the doors on those students. And that's what I think is really important, is finding a way to still provide the possibility, the opportunity for a higher education at your institution, rather than just shutting the doors and not trying to find a solution. Because at the end of the day, these students are our future. Either we want them to be a drain on our economy, or we want them to be a contributing member to our society and pay taxes and be legal eventually and be able to contribute back from what they've learned through their higher education. Or if becoming documented isn't in their reality, maybe going back to their homelands and being able to provide something there, or having a career once they go back is what's really important.
And as far as costs to the university, looking for these individuals, most students, or most admissions counselors, when we are out conducting our fairs or visiting schools, we don't have specific undocumented days, or this is a session just for X student. We do it for a general audience. So there is no specific fund that is set aside to be able to attract these students. There is a little bit more research that I think should be done with students and how much this could cost a university. If one were to think about it, you don't have any students that are undocumented attend. You may lose out on, even if they are charged in-state or out-of-state, you're losing out on that X amount of money. If you're giving that individual in-state versus out-of-state, you're still getting an individual that may not have attended, no matter what price or tuition they are paying. And in my mind, I haven't done any math on that, in my mind that would be beneficial to the university, being that no additional funds are used to attract the student.
Well, fair enough. Maybe if you could say a word or two about how you go out and do some of these panels that you both do. Because I found that really interesting as we were getting ready for today. You guys really go out and do panel discussions about this topic.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, we started, Olander and I met a few years ago, and we have this similar passion with working with underrepresented minority students, specifically Latino and Hispanic students. From there, we have our connections to certain counselors in our areas where we recruit. And actually, the director of counseling from Chantilly High School, she's actually the director of student services there, Robin Lady, she contacted us with this idea that she wanted to do a specific parent night this year for her Hispanic families. And so that's kind of how this whole thing evolved, because once we had something in place and it really worked, we sat with about 25 different families, and we basically told them all about College 101. We couldn't go into too much detail, but from the application process to what your decisions mean, to what financial aid is, and where you go to apply for that. So all the basic necessities we thought that they needed, and that has certainly involved because the word of mouth, I think, has gotten around to other counseling staffs that we can do this and that we are bilingual. We can provide those services and that information completely in Spanish, and we're passionate about it. We're not there just to inform them about our institutions, but we're there to inform them about the process so that they have everything in place to move forward from there.
It's a very unique population where these students, not all of them are undocumented or DREAM Act students. They could be here permanent residents or U.S. citizens and just need the information, parents need the information translated in Spanish. And it's a unique group of students, whereas an English presentation might just cover financial aid, might just cover how to apply to a university, whereas this group of students, you have to be the expert of everything, and you have the same amount of time: financial aid, documentation, residency, how to even start to look for a university, when you should begin. And it's a very unique population, but overlapping in Northern Virginia is one of the larger Latino populations in the state of Virginia, and that sort of helps out as well when we're able to target different high schools in the area.
Well, I remember reading a piece, I don't remember when it was, but the Baltimore Sun did a piece about one of the universities in Maryland, and the university took a very aggressive position in requiring a lot of years of tax paperwork, more than the legal necessity was, or was required. And basically, the Baltimore Sun did an investigative piece and discovered that this university, and I don't remember which university it was, but was being more aggressive than they needed to be for this population. And what I thought was interesting about this was that it was really a third party, in this case a newspaper, that was actually doing it.
It's very interesting, and when I was familiar with what the state of Maryland does require to establish domicile, I do know specifically, if we're going to talk about a specific group, the DREAM Act students, or those that wish to qualify for Maryland's DREAM Act, do have to provide at least 3 years of tax paperwork. And I don't know, were they requiring a little bit more than the 3 years?
I think it was 3. It was the difference between 3 and 4 years, and because the university started on a different calendar, a lot of families didn't have it. And the Baltimore Sun was pointing out that they were being too aggressive about it, and ultimately the university relented, and now it's only the 3 years that you're referring to.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah.
That is very interesting, and unfortunately it falls to the university and their policy and what stance they want to take to provide those students those opportunities. And if an institution feels like that's not a population that they want to open their doors to, or give the possibility to apply to, or they want to make it a little bit tougher for them to apply to, they can do that. And that's what it boils down to. And in some cases it's unfortunate. In some cases it can be a true hope for students, and I think Maryland does a good job of that, providing those students the possibility of having the opportunity to go on and to achieve an affordable higher education.
But you do raise an interesting point with that comment, Rosemary, which is that universities do make affirmative decisions. So if I were to be the director of admissions at the University of XYZ and say, you know, I want more students from the state of Colorado or more students from a particular country, I could go ahead and put resources out to do that, but that would be my affirmative decision to do that, yes, or not. And I think that's an important point that viewers don't always understand, that these are decisions that people are making.
Absolutely, and that's how I ended up being the Washington, D.C. Regional representative for Purdue, which is in Indiana. So, you know, they made that decision that this was an area that, you know, students are intelligent. They have, you know, the opportunities to take AP honors classes. It's a great population of students in this area, and that's how I ended up here. So yes, universities can take the stance based on, you know, what their recruitment goals are, or their enrollment goals are, and move resources around to accommodate those.
And there's a very fine line a director would have to be on to make these decisions. You have to make decisions in the best interest of not only the university, but the Commonwealth of, say, specifically Virginia or the state of Maryland, to be able to make sure that the proper use of taxpayers' dollars is being put forward in whatever policy or decisions are made when it comes to recruitment efforts.
Well, let's go to Virginia for a second. So in Virginia, Olander said we're talking before about one of the rulings that was made about 10 years ago. My understanding is that there was another ruling that was made within the last couple of years, which basically goes in the opposite direction. And are you relying on the second ruling but not the first ruling?
Yes. Well, the first ruling, you still can see that some universities do request the documentation paperwork up front with the application. The second ruling is more of a ruling that affects the tuition of a DREAM Act student. So the ruling that the Attorney General made this past April was that those students that are part of the deferred action policy or deferred action project, they are able to apply for in-state tuition if they provide the right paperwork to be considered for that. A couple of different topics or different rules that they have to adhere by. They have to have had DACA status for at least a year. They need to provide everything that an in-state student that does have paperwork or is a U.S. citizen provides as well. So that could be tax papers, it could be a driver's license proving that they are a registered voter in the state, which of course with this group, some of those they cannot provide, but those are just some of the things that are required to be considered for in-state tuition. Not all DACA students in the state of Virginia will be considered for in-state tuition just because they will not have the proper paperwork to be able to provide.
Well, let's assume that somebody's watching this show from overseas, right? And as you know, people overseas watch the show. And somebody's looking at this and says, okay, they're talking about undocumented students. This is a strange topic because the United States of America, or at least some states of the United States of America, are welcoming students who are in the United States in some undocumented or illegal way, but yet they're still looking for a way to provide education to the people who are there. How would you respond to that? Because that might seem like a strange concept in a lot of parts of the world.
Well, yes, it can be considered a very strange concept. We have been providing K through 12 education for decades now to any student regardless of immigration status. And that has been going on. It's just till recent years that we've been able to provide, or at least the nation as a whole has had leadership, or at least to be able to provide higher education to these individuals. And of course it's always changing, where in 2012 the news was DACA, where now students who are here illegally or without documentation are able to apply for a specific program to attend higher education, but there was no ruling on tuition. And then it wasn't until recently that you hear more information about these students, depending on the state, what the states say, can apply for in-state tuition. There even, as recent as November 2014, the president had issued another executive order, and that little bit of information on community colleges also had an expansion on DACA, moving it from 2 to 3 years. Of course, this, though, recently has been put on hold due to a Texas judge's ruling within the past 2 weeks, and with that, 26 different states are in support of this Texas judge. And of course, you have the federal government, the executive office, that is saying otherwise, that this is a legal executive order that can go about. So it's always changing when it comes to deferred action, documented students, undocumented students, DACA students, a lot of different terminology, but mainly with the DACA students are who we are speaking with.
But as you were explaining that, I was thinking of the definition of democracy. Can you imagine if we were having this discussion in many countries, and I don't want to name any countries, but perhaps we wouldn't be having this free, open debate about this, right? You would either be a citizen of that country or you wouldn't be, and that would be that. So I think it's interesting that you both are out kind of doing what you can for this. But I do want to get back to the issue of the cost, because it seems to me that that's the weakest argument that's on the other side, where some universities are, especially public universities, are taking public funds and taxpayer funds. And why are we helping one set of students versus another set of students? And that's, maybe if you can address that a little bit more.
I think starting by clarifying that in-state tuition versus out-of-state tuition does not mean free tuition. In-state tuition is just a discount for residents of that state. Many of these students came here when they were children, some below the age of 5, and they've spent their entire childhood in that state or in the United States in general, and they've gone through their entire high school career, middle school career, some elementary school career, and they've achieved grades academically. They've achieved awards for National Hispanic Honor Society, National Honor Society, recognition. They're high achieving students. And, you know, the argument that this is costing us and, what is this costing us is the bigger question. And I think it's not a question that we can really answer until more institutions see these students start to graduate and they see them from the beginning of the DACA process rather than halfway through their college career getting awarded DACA eligibility and then graduating 2 years later. So I think it's a tough question to answer right now because it is so new, and we're not going to have those answers until we see more of this population become more informed and go out for these opportunities and really seek them out, because you're talking about such a minimal number of students right now, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to inform them of the opportunities out there. We do tell them about DACA during our presentations. If they're somebody that falls into the window where they could apply, they should apply for it because it opens those opportunities for them. So yes, the financial burden is probably more on the K through 12 side more than anything right now because it's just starting to evolve over to the higher education side. So it's really tough for either side to make that argument quite yet.
And Olander, do you have something to add to that?
Well, there's a lot of short-term vision when it comes to how will it affect with the economy, what are the costs of it. If you were to look 10, 15 years down the road, I'm positive that you would see you would have a different view on how the costs of this program would affect universities, would affect states with the plan, and how allowing a student to attend college or university at an in-state rate or even out-of-state rate could have a long-term benefit.
Well, fair enough.
And just to add a little blip to that, I think the bigger question when people go straight to cost and finance is definitely the larger question of how, if we don't educate these students, if we don't provide them with the possibility to go on to higher education and have the possibility to achieve well-paying jobs, how are they going to affect the nation's economy in the long run once they have their own families? Are they going to be applying for social services? Are they going to be seeking out taxpayers' monies in services? And that's the bigger question and the bigger picture. So Olander brings up a good point that I think we think too much in short-term views, but in the reality, I think we need to think of the benefit of educating these students as a whole nation.
Well, but couldn't we think about that for every poor student in the country?
Absolutely, but where are those poor students right now that have documents? If they're not already seeking out these opportunities, then what are we losing by providing these students that are and are high achieving? What are we losing there? Those students, are they really going to go out for those opportunities if they find out that 3 undocumented students didn't apply for college or couldn't afford to pay for it? Are they going to be able to get into the institution that these students are applying to? Some of them are applying to Ivy League schools. Some of them are applying to the top universities in the nation, and they're getting in because they've achieved those grades and they've earned it. So the bigger question is, are we losing something by not giving impoverished students those opportunities that they might have not sought out on their own? Or are we losing something by not giving these high-achieving, talented students the opportunity to really pull through and see themselves through a higher education that they've been given the opportunity to, but they might not financially be able to afford it?
And when thinking on this subject, you think illegal immigrants, undocumented, millions of individuals in the country. An interesting statistic that I came across, the state of Virginia, since making the ruling in 2014, around a little over 80 students enrolled, DACA students enrolled into public 4-year institutions at an in-state tuition rate. So that's not that large of a number if you think about it, where it's easy to confuse the millions versus less than 100 that have actually been able to take advantage of it.
Fair point, and fair points. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you would like additional information about Rosemary Martin or Olander Fleming, please visit purdue.edu or longwood.edu. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.